remarkable one. Did you know that 90 to 95% of the freight you touch on OTR has actually touched a truck and is ran through what we call Warehouse Alley? To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. Good morning, everybody. And hey, listen, so before we go, I know you're all going to say, where's Dean? We got a new face today. We got Ken Adamo. And so Dean is on a little bit of a trip. So Ken has been so nice enough to jump in and take Dean's place on Data Day Wednesday. And Ken is an expert in what we're going to talk about today, which is so important because the conversation we're going to have today can truly, I think it'll shock you. I think that it'll open up your awareness to the North American freight market and kind of hopefully, I mean, I know, Ken, we don't have a crystal ball, but hopefully we'll get an approach as to what we can expect in the future. So I'll put it over to you, Ken. I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of share where you're from, and then we'll start our conversation for today, my friend.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Ken. My title is Chief of Analytics at DAT. I have responsibility for our ratings and analytics products, data science, industry analysis, and just general analytics goings on. And yeah, I'm covering for Dean while he sends me pictures of wine from the Spanish regatta, trying to talk me into going halfers on a yacht with him. But maybe he'll bring a bottle like or two of that Rioja back.
It sounds like Dean's having fun. That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is kind of just coincidental, right? So I come from FedEx. I was there for about 7 years. I've been at DAT for 2 years. So this kind of warehouse alley, freight alley conversation is sort of kismet, if you will, because this wasn't planned, right? I was just covering for Dean.
Yeah, no, and you know what? When Dean was giving us the background on you, I thought, couldn't have a better conversation, because really when you look at, freight alley, warehouse alley, the Tennessee area in general, I mean, more probably Nashville West. But I remember my first customer was in Afton, Tennessee. Plus Mark Incorporated was in Afton, Tennessee. And it's funny because when I first got into the industry, a guy came into my office and he dropped a Harris manufacturer and producer's guide on my desk. And we're talking old school. Google wasn't around. Computers were barely even active. It was a big, for internet. And he came and he dropped it on my desk. He says, listen, if you can't sell in Tennessee, get the fuck out of the business. And I never understood it, but all the way back then, 28 years, Tennessee has been a major spot in the North American market for freight. You look at a lot of the tech guys that are in Tennessee in the freight market tech, so what we wanted to do is if you can kind of share with us the overall dynamics, ship to warehouse, what it's doing, what you've seen it doing, and then some of the data you shared with us before we got on about what it's done just this year. And then we'll kind of take the Q&A from there, because I know people are going to have some questions.
Perfect.
When I think about this part of the country, I think about kind of what the Great Lakes region used to be when the big three were booming, right? And I'll bring that back around to why that is in a second, but let's just kind of level set on geography. I think of Memphis as obviously FedEx's world hub, so that's down there, but you have tons of presence down there with the big national LTLs, big truckload carriers have hubs down there. I think most people wouldn't stretch it this far north, but I firmly believe that you got to go up to Louisville to wrap that in. You got Nashville, Chattanooga, and thinking about that area of the country, as you mentioned, there's tons of warehouses because there's just a ton of freight activity. Things are coming in, they're getting sent to warehouses, they're getting broken down from bulk, they're getting kind of sent all around the country, right? If you think about your average FedEx air freight, a big 777 wide body lands from Asia or EMEA, lands in Memphis, it gets broken down into everywhere that it needs to go. It goes out to other regional hubs and then down to P&D, and a lot of that needs to happen very, very quickly. But then there's also all the stuff coming back in, right? So feeding back into UPS's hubs, feeding back into the major LTL hubs, you have empty containers, you have empty ULDs, which are the things that go on planes. And then it's a huge return area, right? These serve as huge consolidation points for retailers looking to make returns. It's no mystery why a lot of the major retailers, both e-commerce and brick and mortar, have put major facilities down there to help feed the hubs. That's just a term you hear over and over and over again. You feed the hub. The closer you are to the hub, the better chance you have of making cutoffs and getting out on those flights. You have things coming into Savannah, right, that get pushed up into that market to get either bulked or break bulk and then shipped out. So what we typically see is retail peak is the busiest time of the year in this area. Things just go absolutely nuts. Everyone wants their stuff on Amazon, right? They want their stuff coming from Walmart and Target online. So things really, really, really build. And then this recent phenomenon in the last 7 to 10 years with e-commerce, you have this return spike that happens after Christmas. So it used to be, if you talk to an old grizzled LTL guy or gal, things died right after Christmas. Yard workers went on furlough, forklifts sat idle. And now it's like 2 to 3 weeks into January, things are just pretty much just as busy because you have all this stuff coming back, right? You ordered 2 shirts in 2 different sizes and you ate too much turkey and ham, so the one didn't fit, so you send it back. Not that I know anything about that. But so typically right now, things would be slow, right? We'd expect things, returns that went through the system. Not the case. I've looked at every year going back to 2015, and I just picked the 2 big markets that dominate this area, Louisville and Memphis. Every single time period for those first 40 days of the year, rates have declined, except this year. They're up from about $2.80 to pushing $3 a mile on aggregate outbound from those markets. It's remarkable, right?
Wow. On a normal 20%. Market that should be dead right now.
Should be, right? But think about what happened last year, right? Last year felt like a rock after return season. Like everyone's like, okay, is everything going back to normal? And then Texas froze over. All but 2 LTL terminals closed in Texas. We had a massive winter storm. The entire electrical grid failed. And it's shot out of a cannon, right? It's just amazing to think like what happened last year, this time versus what's happening now. But again, most markets, even this year, right, even in this crazy environment, have either plateaued or pulled back a little bit. Not the case in these big Tennessee, Southern Kentucky, Northeast Arkansas markets. It's just been remarkable, the strength. I think it's up 20% year over year, 40 to 50% over 2 years ago. The rates.
And do you see with e-commerce becoming more and more prevalent, more and more companies? I mean, I remember, so up in Canada, and I don't know about the US, but up in Canada, like Bath and Body Works, right? My wife loves the Bath and Body Works candles. We love the soaps. And during the pandemic, they did not do e-commerce. They actually just started doing e-commerce like 3 months before the end of last year. So you think of that, I mean, up in Canada, especially in Ontario, we had way more restrictions than most of the US. But I mean, malls were closed, these areas were closed, and the huge I can't even imagine what they would have lost in sales. But they finally started doing e-com. And with the transition, I mean, I'm seeing small little places in my town, and we're 15,000 people in our town. That's it. One postal code. That's it. And there's shops in town now that are doing e-com, and do you see this just growing as more and more like brick and mortar stores switch to e-com, more family focused stores where it's, father and then son or daughter took over the store, switch to e-com? Do you see it kind of continuing that peak and rising?
Yeah. I mean, when I was at FedEx, I never thought the words regional parcel carrier those were like oxymorons, right? You had FedEx and UPS and some DHL for our European friends, and that was it. And now I got people coming to my house in like a 1998 Dodge Caravan delivering packages, right? We have LaserShip. I mean, these things are becoming household names. So, and then you have all the long tail of the gig economy supporting, e-commerce. So I think it's here to stay for sure. The question becomes like, how do supply chains adapt around it, like from a permanent standpoint? As much as I hate to say it, because I'm a lifelong FedExer, I'm purple through and through. They've struggled to adapt as well as UPS and some of the others. I mean, I think Amazon, it's pretty much objective at this point to say Amazon's eaten their lunch the past few years. And when I was there, I don't know that there was the sense that it would happen that rapidly. So
I don't think any company really senses how rapid it can happen. I mean, if you look at, I'm going back, I think it was 3 years ago now, when Amazon just dumped XPO over $600 million in business they just took away from them, which seemed like at the drop of a dime, right? Because I had a friend at XPO was like,
them, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, my buddy at XPO said, like, Dan, we had no idea. No idea. And he goes, maybe higher ups knew, but we had no idea. And you would think, how can a company pull $600 million in business away? He goes, like, you know, the volume that you're talking, Dan, he goes, is absolutely insane. He goes, but if anyone can absorb it, it's Amazon. Right? Like DJ, you and I have talked about it before. Amazon can literally lose money on every single delivery and still make
Ken,
money.
I'm glad you brought that up since we're talking about Warehouse Alley. I just seen a report. I forget if it was Freight Waves or where it was from, but about Amazon just buying up warehousing everywhere, where they're literally driving the pricing of warehousing through the roof because they're just buying so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of their model, right? It's like quasi hub and spoke, where they're leveraging cross-docking more than traditional warehousing. They do a lot of forward staging, right? So this Amazon model is a lot different than your typical big hub and spoke LTL or your big hub and spoke truckload, all that kind of stuff. So they're doing it in a way that's less capital intensive. They're doing it in a way that maybe the Teamsters aren't the biggest fan of, right? That was always FedEx Ground's big advantage over UPS, right? If anyone ever had a neighbor growing up that was a UPS route driver, they lived pretty well. And I don't think anyone ever knows that story with a FedEx, unless you're the big route owners at FedEx. Or, I mean, a lot of these Amazon folks, they're college kids working part-time. That would never fly. I mean, you would never drive a brown box truck, milk truck or whatever, bread truck, as a college student. You might be seasonal help or a runner during the holidays, but, Amazon's flipped the cost structure on its head. And to be able to adapt, it's just, again, it's different. The standard, right? There was always this standard of the trucks looked the same way, and the amount of care that went into the branding and the trust. And again, I'll note, I work from home and I look right out my window, and like these Amazon Sprinter vans come down with the doors open and packages falling out. It's like, they don't care, because if it's broken, they'll just overnight you a new one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what it does is, right, so hub and spoke, everything in transportation is density related. When I take like a new data scientist and sit them down that maybe came from biotech or something, it's like, to draw a conclusion they're familiar with, freight breeds on density, right? The more dense, more traffic you have on a lane, the more efficient it's going to operate, right? It's all about delivery. I mean, when I was at FedEx, they were talking about like having like a way to unlock your car so they could go to a business and drop packages in your car, just to increase delivery density of everyone in that building getting packages, because it's all about delivery density. And the less stops you have to make to deliver the same tonnage, or however you want to think about it, the same revenue, the better off you will be. And you see Amazon doing this with like Amazon Day. I don't know how big Amazon you're like. You can save a little money by offering to have all your packages delivered in one box for that week. And again, so I think this density problem is going to come home to roost. I don't care if you're Amazon, FedEx, UPS, Walmart. They're all worried about density, whether it's warehousing, trucking, parcel, airlift.
So so if we get back to Freight Alley and Warehouse Alley, what's the impact of something like you're seeing where there's no dead season after return season or return time? What does that do for the surrounding area? Because I can imagine if it's still spiking and still carrying upwards, you consolidate, 500 packages in a trailer, 1,000 packages in a trailer that everybody's paid shipping. If you look at FedEx, for example, everybody's paid $40, $50, $60 to ship that package. You kind of have more money than a regular manufacturer there looking for a truckload of goods, right? You have more money you can spend on freight. What is that doing to capacity in that market? Besides driving up the price at 20 cents, are we finding less trucks? Are we seeing more stuff on the spot market than in contract? How does that looking right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of folks who don't understand the inner workings of how the whole machine operates understands that, like, FedEx and UPS are two of the largest, what we call purchase transportation buyers in the country, right? FedEx Freight, when I was there, this was public. This wasn't like a secret. I mean, they were the largest intermodal buyer in the United States, right? Because they had largely shifted their entire economy network to focus on getting things bulked up and put on the rail and sent to the next hub, or kind of however to break it down and do it. So yeah, you are out there competing with folks. Now, there's some of this that just doesn't, like the FedEx Express stuff, the UPS Express stuff, that stuff is probably not analogous. You're not competing with them. Those trailers are largely specialized, power only. They've made a push to get some of the contractors on those lanes to add hydraulic roller deck trailers, but by and large, they still own a large portion of those to get the ULDs on without damaging them and whatnot. But the general freight, the general package freight moving around these areas, yeah, you're competing with people that have deeper pockets. And the other thing, I want to wrap it around to the automaker comment. This southeastern United States is the new Great Lakes region for automakers. Pretty much every major European auto manufacturer and every major Japanese auto manufacturer have put up major area of developments in these areas. They've gotten huge tax abatements, whether it's Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, Tennessee. You could take Nissan, for example. I mean, they've pretty much built their entire supply chain in that olive branch kind of area, and their parts replenishment for all their national dealers. They're making cars down there. They're large parts, like for auto body and stuff, feed out of there. So you're competing with them too, right? Because they're gearing up for their spring season, their new model years, and all of that. So
when their lines change, how much
exactly,
different products go into a line change when they change over. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I got my brother-in-law actually runs Fronius, which is their welders are automotive welders. And he was telling me, Dan, he goes, I don't think anyone really understands when they change a line, what goes into it. He says hundreds of truckloads to change a line of just moving equipment out, moving equipment in, reorganize.
Yeah, they just did that at the Ford plant over here in Ohio. So they were changing a lot.
So you think about like the freight lexicon, right? I mean, who cared? I mean, 10 years ago, who cares about Smyrna, Tennessee, on like a national level, or like Montgomery, Alabama? But these places have huge, I mean, thousands and thousands of truckloads of freight, and it's all being moved around, and it all needs kind of. I mean, we all know how the automakers work. They're not sitting around with like tons of excess inventory. That stuff doesn't get there. It's a line down situation. It's causing problems. Dealers aren't stocking fenders for every model Nissan makes in every color anymore, right? They put their order in, and their expectation is it gets there the next day. So you're competing in this new wide open, and it's a lot different than it used to be. In the tier one automakers largely built that supply chain in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and it was shorter. You could run along the Great Lakes, and there was all kind of freight bouncing around. There's not much coming out of Montgomery, Alabama. You go there, and you need to figure out where to go next and what to do, and you have to be a little bit savvier about how you're operating, or else, like I said, you're going to be in trouble.
It's interesting you say that, because I know when I was working with Magna quite a bit, it was all in and around that Great Lakes, and you can do a milk run with a tractor. And you can about 2-3 days you're picking it up, but it was huge revenue for all the different skids. And now what I'm seeing, and when I've talked to some people still in automotive, those milk runs are getting longer, and there's longer distances between those areas of pickups, which creates less revenue. Because it's longer,
and a high potential for failure, right? If you get hung 100%. Up, the guy's not at the guy or gal's not at the guard check. When you get to that middle stop of the milk run and you're delayed 45 minutes, you're running into hours problems. You're running into all this stuff. Mm-hmm. The one saving grace, I don't know if you guys have done much work with like the big three, the original big three. They've all moved to those boards, right? I don't know what they're still calling anymore, but like the Menlo board, the Rider board, the Active Aero boards. Those scorecards are highly punitive if you mess up. Mm-hmm. I think the Euro automakers, the Japanese automakers, although they're very process oriented, they've cut a little bit more slack to their carriers. They've built a little bit more slack into their system, so that if you miss a pickup, you're not penalized for a whole month or something crazy like that. So again, still very stringent requirements, but not as strict as like what the big three were pushing 3 to 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, I mean, even so back in 2003, I started at an asset-based carrier, and we landed NLM.
Yeah, there you go. NLM and PTM were two of the big originals.
Yeah. And we thought it was like, I honestly, full transparency, I thought it was like payday heaven. I'm like, dude, we're in with the automotive guys. Like this is the start of a new lease on our business. And let me tell you, it was insane. I mean, to the point where I got ill just from the stress and the anxiety of dealing with these guys. And, you can have weeks on end where you're 100% perfect, and then something goes wrong, and it's okay, you're not doing anything for a couple of weeks. And it's like, what, are you guys kidding me? Like, and it's like, well, hey, this is how we work. And if you don't like it, too bad. There's like 100 people waiting to take your spot. Yeah.
And it's like, I got 80 Sprinter vans waiting out back to haul this transmission down to
literally sorry. Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, think about too, right? This whole apparatus that happens. People think of how these supply chains have evolved, and they're just thinking about Amazon and Target and Walmart. I went on a trip when I was at FedEx down to Mexico where, tons of auto parts are made. These warehouses are like 50,000 person shifts, like ZF transmissions, for example. They don't truck that stuff because the risk of it getting stolen, going over the mountains and crossing the border and all that stuff, it's just not going to happen. So they airlift it from Toluca, Mexico, let's just say North Mexico City, into Memphis, and that stuff all has to move, right? So I think like understanding that you're competing in this diversified pool for warehouse space, for trucking capacity, for containers, for chassis, depending on where it's going. I think if you're, no matter what part you're playing in that supply chain in that area, it helps you understand that where to maneuver, for lack of a better term. Like, where can I push? Where should I build relationships? Where should I avoid? And those are just all going to be crucial to be successful, because it's becoming like a shark tank down there of all of these competing interests.
So Ken, I got a question for you, because that piques my interest a lot. Is how does one start researching that information? Like if you were to come in now, just off the bat, say you didn't have that experience in the background, where would you start researching that information to really find out what is going on in this area so I can better help my customers? Because I understand probably some of the manufacturers that aren't involved in automotive and that kind of stuff, or packages in those areas, understand the big people that are there. But I don't know if they necessarily understand how those big people actually control the capacity flow that would impact them and increase their rates, right? How would you go about kind of starting that research?
So I'll be a DAT homer for a second and say, we have tools, right? You could sit down, and this is what Dean does. This is what I do all the time, right? We sit down and we look at our MSCI maps. We look at how things are changing, when things are busy. We have, just a simple year-over-year chart. And again, as much as I love you to come to DAT and spend some money with us and become a customer, because then you can bend our ear, right? And probably even if you aren't a customer, I love talking about freight, so does Dean. But
be careful.
There's ways that you can. There's ways you can look at your own data, whether you're a carrier and you're looking at your TMS, a broker looking at your TMS, you're a shipper, you might be looking at your ERP system to see where freight's moving. Sometimes it's as simple as like looking, if you're a shipper, especially, like where have I had drop-offs? When have I had drop-offs? When have I had service delays? When have I had issues? Maybe when I had a skid damaged or whatnot, and where are the countries that happening and when is it happening? So I can kind of plan around it and understand. But, staying plugged in to industry publications. We were just talking before we went live about some things you guys were reading. I think it just helps understand, like you can stitch all of that context together in a way that you couldn't even 5 or 6 years ago, where Port of Savannah, right? They were having some troubles right around the peak. It had just permeated, right? Everyone was talking about LA, but if you thought about Savannah, they were starting to really struggle there towards getting into Christmas. And then you just think about, okay, well, I'm going to use whatever data I have to see, like, okay, Savannah, Atlanta, Decatur, like what's happening in those markets? How can I paint a picture? Because look, regardless of what you have in the supply chain, if you have a customer on the hook and they're like, I need trucking capacity out of Savannah, and you don't know that market's going crazy right now, you haven't read the latest news about backups at the port, you're going to charge way too little.
Yep.
It's just the way it's going to happen. Or, if you're still using information of a port backlog that happened 2 weeks ago, and you get a customer on the hook and they want to move freight, you quote them double what it should be, they're probably never going to call you back. And information has become too freely accessible. Data has become too widely used to kind of be poking around in the dark anymore. When I was at FedEx, my entire time we were pushing to use more data sources, grab as much information as we could, like the IHS Market JOC Peers data to understand freight flows coming in. You don't have to be a freight nerd like us. You could just look at general port volumes coming into like Savannah, Houston, LA, Long Beach, Oakland, and then like New York, New Jersey, and understand generally ocean what's coming in. And look, if it's more than last week, if it's more than last month, that market's going to be tighter.
And there was also what I used to look at for a lot of customers in port cities was I would look at 30 days down the road, because your data will tell you kind of what's left Asia and the volume increase that's left Asia. And I would look at it and I'd say, okay, when we had there was a quartz company I was dealing with, and they were bringing a lot of stuff in from Israel and Puerto Rico and stuff. So it would land at the same ports, but it wasn't Asia. But we would look at the departures from Asia to say, okay, when are they landing? Because if they're landing at the same time, like we're volume. And especially when it comes to month end, it's like, okay, guys, I prepare your customers now, because if these containers land, then it's going to create a backlog. That backlog, we saw it out in BC, could be 10, 14, 16, 20, 2 weeks, 3 weeks delay. I mean, we never had the major, 6, 8, 9, 12 week delay like the LA had. But it was something that we sat back and we said, we need to understand this, especially when it was getting closer to Christmas, because now you've got a real window where if they don't get it in the store by X time, forget about it. The PO is cut off, right?
Yeah.
And just understanding that is huge.
I think one of the coolest things that happened during COVID is this kind of boom that's happened with content creation in the freight space. Like I never had that when I was at FedEx, to sit down in the morning and kind of have my selected list of things I'm going to listen to and read. Because, and again, I'm totally partial, so I'll admit my bias, but I wish I had Dean when I was at FedEx, or like, to sit down and listen to your show, or, just to kind of like understand the context of what's happening in the market of, I mean, I think Dean's a little extreme. He could tell you like if so-and-so was sick and didn't pick as many boxes of strawberries as they typically would, so freight coming out of Yuma is going to be delayed. Like that. That's a little hyper focused, but
that's why we call him the mad scientist of data. Dean breaks it down like just phenomenal. And but guys, you know what? That level of data gives you an advantage over everyone, because even you look at something as simple as when ELD was coming out, right? When ELD was coming out, I was speaking to as many clients as possible about here's like what I predict is going to happen. And it's funny because Magna came back to me and said, you and one other company are the only two people that are talking about it, but we're Magna. It's not going to necessarily impact us. Yeah. And 2 months after, ELD came out, Magna called me back and said, like, listen, we need to figure something out. Like data is the new oil. For sure. Yeah, find
your person, right? John Seidel was a guy that was doing the that circuit with ELDs, and when FedEx, thankfully, a bunch of us were listening and like saw him at a bunch of different conferences. Like, look, this is going to be a bigger deal than people are saying. Like, this is going to change everything by and large. And look, it did. And then during COVID, it's like that guidance. Like, I'm in this every day, like seeing what I see. Like, I can't disclose, right? If we hold this position. It's a very powerful position to be in, of accountability and anonymity and trust, right? Because like the data that we look at, if you were in the industry, would be an insane competitive advantage, right? But that's why we have it, because we're a trusted, neutral third party. Mm-hmm. So I only saw a sliver of it as a customer, and it was powerful. But like seeing what I see now, it's like, holy cow. Even having all of that data, $120 billion of annual paid freight bills at a line by line level, I still listen to and reach out and learn something every day or week about what's going on out there, because it's just so different, and it's such a big, diverse country, right? There's Oakland, and like the coffee, most of the coffee comes in through Port of Oakland, and how that's working, and are we seeing delays in green coffee, and that impacts downstream warehousing of coffee and the coffee roasters. Dean's latest comment with avocados, he mentioned like a week before everyone was talking about this avocado thing, like CNN's reporting on avocados. And like Dean's watching it a week before. Like freight leads everything. Like that's something that I just am so thrilled that came through the pandemic. Like everything has to get there somewhere. Like I don't have an aluminum smelting plant in my backyard.
Everything.
Yeah.
That's one of the best comments I've heard all year.
I love it.
Freight leads everything.
And again, guys, you can see Ken's passion. Obviously, you can see your passion in this and what you're talking about. But again, this is we talk about it all the time on the show. I mean, this is the 5 Ps. I call it the 5 Ps. Proper preparation prevents poor performance.
I love it. I got to write that one down.
And this is literally, just being a pro in what you're doing. And this is, I mean, that's what Ken's telling you. The data's out there. You have to find it. If you want to take your game to the next level, you got to find it. You got to go out and get it. Be prepared.
Yeah, man, and it's not all data. I mean, my boss used to make me go sit at TAs and find FedEx drivers and buy them breakfast and talk to them about their problems and what's going on, right? Sometimes it takes like rolling up your sleeves and applying that context to the data to really say, because we're going to get to a point, I hope, right? For DAT's sake, everyone has the data. And then it becomes a competition of who can add the best context to it and who can respond to it fastest. And that's what I'm excited for, because I love this industry. I love getting up every day and going to work and dealing with this kind of crazy problem that is logistics.
Just seems like a real big chess game, right?
Yeah,
It
some
is.
days. And some days it
It's
seems like you're trying to like herd cats and chickens all at once. Like you're trying to get
And avocados, of course.
and
and
avocados, of
avocados.
course.
Yeah. You're trying to get avocados walking. Yeah.
Oh, and
So,
French fries. We got that French fry issue too, right?
yeah, well, I mean, little did we know. I mean, how one thing impacts the next, and how you throw a rock in a pond in Ontario and it ripples over to Asia is just insane. It's crazy, crazy. But Ken, we know you got to go.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here, my friend. That was such an awesome conversation. I hope it added a lot of light and clarity to everyone. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the comments today, but we know Ken was on a very tight timeline. DJ, what do you have to pull us out of here today, brother?
Definitely. Hey, thanks, Ken. Guys, so I'm going to lead again with freight leads everything. Remember that. Ken said it. Ken said it right here. Freight leads everything. But again, thanks, Ken, for joining us. Remember, like and subscribe, American Logistics, Centurion Trucking. Check out Daman if you're moving freight or Canadian broker. Again, Sales Chatter Live. Like and subscribe to catch us so you see us live every day, daily, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. For you in the West Coast, Lisa, shout out. Thanks for joining us. And I'll take you out with this. Zig Ziglar. I think this is the best way. Success occurs when opportunity meets preparation. Stay prepared, guys.
I love that quote.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education